This is our final session in the workshops of the day, and I'm very pleased to be joined by an excellent panel who are going to discuss workplace mental health journeys. So firstly, facilitating the session is Paulette Cohen, who's the Director of Diversity and Inclusion from Barclays. She's joined in the panel by Andy Croxford from the Environment Agency, Sarah Boddey from Northern Trust, and Marianne Dyer from Shell. And I'm going to hand over to you, Paulette.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Really good to be here. It's an absolute privilege to come to an event like this. Working in the field of mental health within a business, seeing so many people committed to finding out more and being proactive in their organisations is a real pleasure. You can start to see the tidal wave, you can see the groundswell of interest. And I particularly love seeing people wearing their green ribbons, of which there are several here today. I look after the This Is Me campaign for Barclays, and as a trustee of the Lord Mayor's Appeal have also been heavily involved in scaling This Is Me outside of Barclays and with other businesses. So a real privilege to be here, but absolutely my privilege is to be with this panel on stage. I don't need to introduce the panel. I think they've already been introduced. But I think we're in for a treat because you've got so much experience and so many insights to share about the different journeys that they've been on around mental health. And you've also got some really tangible successes. And that's what I'd really like us to focus on, if we may. I think what I'd like to do is kick off the session. People know who you are, but they don't know why you started the journey and what you wanted to achieve when you set out on that journey. So I think it'd be great if in a couple of minutes you could each share a little bit about that. So Marianne, Shell, why did Shell kick off on this journey? You had a real focus on embedding it within the organisation, changing the language, building it around resilience. Why did you set off on that, and what did you hope to achieve?
Well, thank you ever so much for inviting me here today. And you're all probably very well aware of Shell. It's everything from getting oil out the ground, working in new energies, to refining, to chemicals, to filling up your car as well. So an enormous organisation, 89,000 employees worldwide, in over 100 countries as well. We have quite a comprehensive mental well-being offering there, but we recognise that actually all of us are faced with stress within our lives. It's an inevitability, especially in this day and age, both within our working lives, but also in our home lives as well. And we really see our resilience programme, this is the part I'm going to talk about in our offering, as a real life skill that everybody should be able to learn ways in which they can develop the techniques, the strategies, the other ways of thinking, the other ways of looking at life stresses to help them get through and work together actually with their colleagues and with their teams and with their families as well. So our resilience programme has been very key to that in the helping to prevent people becoming ill through the stresses of normal day-to-day life as well.
Okay, really helpful, thank you. Sarah, Northern Trust, another financial institution. I know we both have Barclays in common, but can you share a little bit about what the journey's been like at Northern Trust? You've done a lot, you've brought in mental health first aiders, you've embedded the strategy within the business. Same question to you, why did you embark on that journey? What a success, what did you want to achieve from that?
Yeah, sure. I guess we had been working in the field of mental health for a few years, and we had been doing a few events, some awareness-raising workshops, but things, if I'm honest, kind of around the edges, very useful for raising awareness and getting the conversation started. We then had Johnny and Neil actually come in and talk to our organisations, and I know they've gone into many of your organisations as well. And that was a real tipping point for us, actually, a tipping point in getting the conversation going and a bit more out in the open. But also it brought a lot of feedback to us from line managers in particular, but everyone in the organisation, that they wanted some help and they wanted to increase their skill set around managing mental health in the workplace. So people were interested, awareness had already been raised, people were largely on board with mental ill health as a concept, but we were getting a lot of feedback to say, I don't actually know what to do. What do I do as a line manager if somebody comes and says to me that they're feeling unwell? Or what do I do if I'm spotting a few things that aren't, quote unquote, normal for that person? I don't know how to broach that conversation. And that's really when we added the mental health first aid to our strategy. We looked at several different providers and lots of different methods out there for upskilling people around managing mental health, but we felt that the mental health first aid really was the best one. And yeah, it started from there.
Fantastic, thank you. We'll come back to that in a bit because I want to pick up on that bit about line managers, because if I was sitting in the audience, one of the big questions that I'd have is how do you break through that line manager barrier that sometimes we have. I'm going to move on to Andy. Andy, the Environment Agency, I know you're telling me just before we started, you've been there 20 years. You must have seen the evolution of mental health strategies within the Environment Agency. And now I'm going to have to use my prompt card to get this, because the Environment Agency is the Mind Workplace Wellbeing Index #1 employer. Way behind me if I got that one wrong. So perhaps you could just share a couple of minutes on why, why do you have that title? What's your journey been to get there?
Okay, so we've probably been on the journey for maybe 8, maybe 10 years, I guess, and it's small beginnings. I think in terms of where we're trying to get to, we're trying to get to a place, and we have got to a place of, first and foremost, about building a culture around mental health, around openness, around awareness, about destigmatization. We have found that there is we've heard quite a lot today about the importance of leadership, and leadership is really important in this, but what is particularly pleasing about what's happened in the Environment Agency has been the groundswell that we've had. So with 10,000 people across England, we cover 90 offices. We have set up or the staff themselves have set up a mental health network, which is a staff led by the staff for the staff network. And 1 in 10 of our people are now part of that network, and they organise their local events and campaigns, and it's fantastic because of its diversity. So it's not a national, that bit of it is not a national-led programme. It's actually what people on the ground in those individual offices want to do around mental health. So that's been a really big part of our journey.
Fantastic. So you can really see where that #1 employer status came from. I think we've been having a conversation before this event and wanted to pick up on 3 big challenges that I think we've all faced in one way or another. And it's really interesting to hear you talk about that groundswell from grassroots. The This Is Me campaign in Barclays was started by 9 colleagues. 9 colleagues wanting to tell their story, but wanting to tell their whole story. And we were talking about bringing your whole selves to work. You know, that point you said, mental health doesn't just happen in the workplace, or mental ill health doesn't happen just in the workplace. So that groundswell coming from your colleagues is really important, and also that top-down perspective, that leadership is important. But one of the things that we all talked about was, how do you engage line managers in this, and how do you support them to become more mental health confident? So I'm interested, if one of the challenges is breaking through, I always call it I stole it from someone else, the line manager permafrost. We have to engage our line managers. Apparently, there's not a single, I'd love it if someone could disprove this, a single MBA program that puts mental health and well-being as a module on a mental health. So we're putting out leaders into business without those core skills. How have you done it? So I'm going to start in the middle with Sarah, so you don't feel this is like some conveyor belt. But you were talking about this. You talked about line managers saying, how do we do this? What have you done?
Yeah. So I think you have to start from that position, either of your line managers asking for help, or actually recognising that they may not feel confident in coming forward. So in the same way that an individual who is struggling with their mental health may not feel confident to come forward, as we've heard from so many people today, a line manager may be in exactly the same position. This is one of the things that I feel I should be good at already, that the assumption is that I'm going to be good at managing this, but actually nobody's ever given me any help to manage this properly. I may have grown up in a family, in a society, in a culture, in a religion that never really talked about mental health, and so even by osmosis I've never picked up any of those skills, and that's really where, as I said, the mental health first aid training comes in. We open it up to everybody, so it's not just for line managers, it is for everybody, because we feel everybody can be a mental health first aid champion, but we do particularly target managers, and some of our departments have made it mandatory for their managers to attend the training, which worried me at first.
Yes,
I'm a trainer, so I deliver a lot of the training myself, and I must admit at first, whenever anybody is forced to go to a training programme, I don't know if any of you have ever been forced to go to some training, but mentally it's not the best place to start in. But actually, every single person that's been on the course, even those that are there because it's part of their mandatory manager's curriculum, have all got a huge amount from the session.
So you mandate it for line managers and open it up to everyone else?
Yes, all the sessions are open for anybody to register. We've been running them every 2 weeks this year, and every time I release the next wave of dates, within 20-30 minutes, they've all sold out. Okay. And that's because it's just so relevant. I am yet to meet somebody in the opening sessions that we do in the training that hasn't got some sort of experience of or connection with mental health.
And can I just ask, are they go-to people within the organisation? How do you share that someone is a mental health first aider? Is there a role profile, or do you have it as a skill set?
So first of all, when we advertise the course, we're clear what the course is about, and I would advise that you do that. Very occasionally, I know we have, and in some organisations, people have been sent on the course who are currently struggling with their mental health, and that's not what the course is about. It's not a kind of remedial course for people who are struggling with their mental health. So I think be clear what the course is there for. I would say always open it up to everyone. As I said, anybody can be a champion. And actually, if you're somebody more junior in the organisation, speaking to somebody who's also a bit more junior, who's more of a peer, could be actually more useful, less daunting than somebody that's very, very senior.
Thank you for that. So you focused on mental health first aiders. Marianne, what about in Shell? How do you embed it within the business and drive it through line managers and support them in responding to this?
I think we have a three-pronged approach, and that's where the success was. One, about the accessibility of the programme. Secondly, about the team approach. And thirdly, about the cost and accessibility and the flexibility of the programme. Okay. So we actually found from our managers that the draw for techniques, ways of looking at mental health, ways of dealing with it, how to be positive about it, the draw was initially enormous, and it still is. It's always huge. So what we did with our resilience programmes, we built on the principles of the American Psychological Association to develop modules, and we've got 14 core modules, and they're totally scripted. So we were very clear with having such an enormous global population. How do we get it out to everybody? How do we make it accessible to everybody? So what we have done is develop modules that can be delivered by non-specialists. We give them support in the initial videos and support material, but basically anybody who can facilitate a meeting can run a resilience session, which is incredibly important. It's there, it's available, it's free. The only time they have to do is the time out of the business. The second part, as I say, is by the team, for the team. So, as I say, a team, whatever that team looks like, and it could be a well-established team or a new team, or increasingly more so now, virtual teams as well, are able to run these sessions wherever they are. And as I say, it's scripted, even down to that you'll need 2 flipboards, break out here, do this. And it gets the principles of the techniques you're learning in each module. But we really encourage people to learn, put in their own language there, words and language that really resonates with the team and things that are relevant to the team. With the 14 modules, we've also said, do them in whatever order you want to as well. So it's not prescriptive. It gives people flexibility to see which module really resonates with the team at that point in time. And also we encourage them to bring in their own examples as well. And the time frame, again, we always say leave at least 2 weeks between each module so people have got time to process it. But again, the flexibility of fitting it into whatever their work schedule is.
What sort of take-up have you had?
It's been excellent. We're in the tens of thousands of people have taken it up worldwide. And actually, with our modified ones, we've actually taken them, thrown them across the wall, as we say, into our shipping organisation. It's gone out to 400 of our partner shipping organisations, as well as out to seafaring charities. And even we've managed to adapt them to charities helping refugees in Africa and to schools as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Andy, 10,000 people in the Environment Agency. What have you embedded within the Environment Agency to build that mental health confidence and awareness amongst your line managers?
So, like Sarah, we've had a line managers training program. We've made that mandatory. There's question marks whether you make these things mandatory or not. Our view is that we want health, and particularly mental health, to be on the same status as safety. Our people do risky jobs at times involving water, so safety is a really important thing for the Environment Agency. Mental health, we think, should be on equal part of that. So, you would not have mandatory training on safety, so we think you should have mandatory training on mental health. Okay. I think training only goes so far, though. That doesn't necessarily make somebody overnight into a good line manager who can deal with staff with mental health issues. There's a cultural issue here as well, so I think the expectations of our line managers have changed, so we are expecting them to be able to do this people management stuff. Maybe we didn't think that so much 10 years ago. They're being assessed, their performance being assessed in part on how they do that part of their job. And slowly, you talk about the permafrost, it's melting because those people who are not working in this way start to stand out. So it's almost peer pressure that comes forward on this.
It's really interesting because I have my own personal view that a lot of the skills are just really brilliant leadership skills.
Yes.
About listening, understanding, creating time, opening up that conversation. But one of the things you've just said is it's not a quick fix. One of the things that I've noticed, and I think we've all seen the huge, as I say, groundswell of interest around the issue of mental health and well-being, but it isn't a quick fix. There's no, we'll do that this year and then we'll move on to something else next year. How have you in the Environment Agency taken that long-term approach, and how are you making people understand that this isn't a one-off? We're not going to move on to something else next year. Yeah,
I hate the term initiative. We're not doing an initiative here. We're doing something that is about changing and improving the culture of the organisation. We have an ongoing programme of training for both our staff and our line managers. We are dealing with, through the Mental Health Network, we have a series of events. So we're celebrating World Mental Health Day, Time to Change Day. And those events are happening throughout our offices. The messages, only today, our Chief Executive has put out a message to all staff about doing the Mind survey this year. So it's getting the message, the top-down messages from leaders are really important as well. So it's an ongoing drip, drip, drip. It's not like, we're doing it now. We're doing it all the time.
And do either of you have a different approach to that long-term commitment in Shell or Northern Trust? Does it keep the drumbeat going?
Oh, absolutely. And we've developed it much more into human performance and care, because it's the whole care agenda as well. And this should be business as normal. This is how we do business. Interestingly, with shipping, which is particularly challenging part of our organisation because it's 98% male, they're away on ships, it's a lot of isolation. We've actually got the programme where we've made it very clear that our mental health programme is that in 2 years this will be business as normal.
Yeah.
It's just part of the culture, it's just what we talk about, it's just what we do.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, at Barclays we've embedded it within our supportive culture.
Yeah.
So it very much is about cultural change.
Mm-hmm.
And Sarah, anything different at Northern Trust?
I guess what I would add to that is to consider the point about ownership. I see a lot of organisations get hung up or actually kind of stifled by who owns this, who owns mental health, who owns well-being. And I would argue that it doesn't need to and shouldn't have an owner. So if I look within Northern Trust at the team of people that drive this forward, it's diversity and inclusion, it's human resources, it's occupational health, it's our disability staff network, we call them business resource councils, it's people in workplace services, it's people in technology, it's everybody has a part to play in helping that agenda move forward. Just start somewhere. I've seen too many people either not do anything and get paralysed by the fact that no one person owns it, or also sometimes a little bit sadly of, you're treading on my area, well-being is my thing, you go away. Actually, let's just bring everybody together around
that's really helpful to get that. And I think one of the things, or the sort of third area that we collectively talked about, which I think is helpful to share with the audience today, is that bit about if you're going to make this investment, if you're going to embed it within the business, how do you measure the impact of that? And especially if it is jointly owned, I think in our earlier call, we all said it's really difficult. It's a really difficult thing to measure. But you have to make an investment. You're delivering training. You're putting mandatory training for all of your line managers. How do you measure the impact of that?
Yeah, so I do think you have to look at it through, through that lens. We're a bank, we'll have numbers, we'll have data. We want to see that return on investment on what we're doing. First of all, though, I would say the investment in terms of money does not have to be huge. Just on the mental health first aid training, particularly if you get somebody in your organisation to go through the Train the Trainer programme that they offer, for a few £1,000, low £1,000, you can get somebody trained who can then deliver, in the same way that I deliver mostly within Northern Trust to some external organisations as well. There's lots of things you have to do, even if you have low to no budget. But actually, whatever resource you're putting into that, be that money or time or people, you do need to see that return. There's lots of existing points of data that you can look at. So, for example, EAP usage. I actually see it as a success factor if your EAP usage goes up as a result of the work that you're doing around mental health, not down. Same with calls to your private health cover. We have mental health as a direct access pathway now, so you don't have to get a GP referral. People can just go directly through things like your engagement surveys, and then just talk to your staff. It can be as formal as doing a focus group, but I really see the impact of the training that we're doing and the wider strategy around mental health just by talking to a huge range of different people around how supported they're feeling and how different the conversation is now to how it was 1 year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago.
It's more qualitative. It's that conversation. It's sort of permeating the wider culture of the...
Yeah, and I've had to do some managing up around that, if I'm honest, that I can't just bring the management team always hard data on it, right? Mental health is about a human being. Human beings are complex. Human beings are not just a data point. And so, yes, I can bring you some hard data, but some of it is just going to be about me and you as leaders talking to people in the organisation.
Thank you. Andy, what about in the Environment Agency? Any, real insights that you can share with the audience about how you measure the impact of what you've been doing there?
Yeah, so several years ago I went to see our top team about this, and they said, well, we want to know how we compare with other organisations. And then the Mind Workplace Wellbeing Index came along, and so we've entered that. And so that's been a fantastic way for us to measure ourselves against. Well, obviously that's fantastic, but, you know, that's not really why we got involved in it. We got involved in it to understand where we were, but also how we need to improve. And that's an important part of the process. It's not just about getting the gong. It's about how we can improve. But there are lots of other things we can look at as well. So we can look up the take-up of our training, the sign-up to our webinars, the number of events that we organise. So there's there are activity type of models. Interestingly, our sickness absence for mental health issues has gone up in percentage terms. And that's, I believe, because more people feel comfortable to report that rather than saying they've got a cold or whatever it might be. So it's a whole range of different issues. And then just on the more anecdotal side, so, you know, people send me their stories. The anecdotes get better. I had a lot of really bad ones at the beginning of this, and now I have a lot more good ones. I still get the old bad one, but, you know. And just walking around our offices, you see things like signs that people have put up on their desks that say, it's okay to talk about mental health here. Well, you wouldn't have seen that 5 years ago. So there are lots of ways of measuring it.
Thank you. And in Shell, you know, your diverse workforce, you just painted the picture of all the different stakeholders that you've got. How do you assess the impact of what you're doing?
Very similar ways as already described, but also initially, again, you can imagine Shell is full of very clever scientists and want scientific proof that this actually works. So we did a lot of work in the early years, really looking into the engagement scores of teams and collecting that data rigorously. And it showed statistically significant impacts both on the engagement of teams, but how that engagement then impacted on safety performance in different businesses, but also productivity as well, and also the quality as well, and which is incredibly important. And it's externally validated as well.
You have used an external supplier to give you that validation. And I'm really interested around the issue around productivity and being able to demonstrate.
Interesting. How we measured it was the amount of pipes welded within an hour.
Okay.
It's a very aligned score, but it just showed people, those that were more engaged, produced better and more quality production as well. And that's not cynical. They cared about the job. They wanted to do it right because they felt cared for and they were engaged as well. So.
All great responses there, and I think I can resonate with a lot of them from the Barclays perspective. But one of the interesting things, as I say, I'm involved in, This Is Me through the Lord Mayor's appeal as well, and they set up, first of all, the 7 time to change principles, which are great principles, and then 7 of those mirror 7 of the Stevenson Farmer recommendations. They've added in the other 3 that were missing. And the number of organisations that, if they tell stories, show that they can respond to 7 out of 10 of those criteria, is extraordinary. Just the simple concept of telling stories unlocks doors in other ways. And so for us, we're able to, we also build that bridge between, you know, quantifiable, give us the hard results, and we do the EAP stuff and the engagement scores and doubling of disclosure, forgive the use of the word, but it works in this context. Still much more to do, but we can do that. But actually, when you start to look at those wider criteria, everyone said, well, This Is Me is about telling stories. Why is that having an impact? And we're proving that it does. Now, it's really interesting. I've had absolutely no timing until 10 seconds ago. So I've been trying to gauge this. I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll take questions from the floor. But if I could ask you all in summary. We've got an audience here. The session was all about solutions and to support you on your journey. If there was one top tip or one insight that you could share for the audience today that would help them on their journey, what would it be? I'm going to start at the end and work back. Andy.
Okay, so I see three elements to the work: culture, prevention and intervention. I think when you start off on this journey, you tend to think about it in the other order, intervention, prevention, culture. So I would say 3 parts culture, 2 parts prevention, 1 part intervention in your programme.
Great tip, nice and concise, thank you. Sarah?
So with my hat on as a mental health first aider, I would just say, just start. If it's around the kind of training of line managers and others, and I do think that's an important part of your strategy, just start. Mental Health First Aid England offer a lot of public courses. You don't have to get a trainer in expense for the day. Just go and try some of their public courses. They run lots of different versions. Try other versions if you want. See what's right for you. See what you think is going to work in your organisation, and just start. Even if you only get a tiny group of people trained in the subject and out there publicly as champions, that's a start. That's going to help.
Perfect, thank you. And Marianne?
For me, it's about giving empowerment to the workforce and the skills and the ability for them to deliver themselves, but also listening to them, because the customers know what works with them, what resonates with them, and we can all learn together on that. So.
Fantastic, thank you. And if I was going to add my own one to that, I'd go back 1 step behind Sarah. And absolutely, I've actually got written down, don't be afraid to start. But I would say it can start with 1 story. And I'm leaving here to go and watch a colleague of mine who told her story in January this year about, she describes it as burnout. And she had 500 emails. 500 emails within a week of telling her story. She's just told me it's now 900. It's just carried on. Just sometimes it can be 1 or 2 people's stories, and that's where I'd start. I shall thank the panel in a minute. I can't see the questions down there. If there are any questions that have been sent in, perhaps they can come up. Let's see, have I got a couple of minutes for questions? 2, let's see if we can take 2. I like this one about recognition. Does it sometimes create fear at a senior level to step forward with personal issues? Do any of you have experience of one of your senior leaders being open to set that culture by telling their story?
Yes, and it's so powerful. It's incredibly powerful when they do. We've just launched something called the One Thing Wall, where people can post their stories online, and it's talking about the one thing that made a difference to them. And the response we've had to that, we've had some very senior people being very brave and stepping forward, and that has really opened the door to lots of other people as well. So incredibly powerful.
Okay. Thank you. The last question I'm going to pick, and then we'll wrap up, is that someone's asked a question about internationalising this. I'm sure Shell have. I'm going to post this one to Sarah, if I may. What experiences have you had about rolling this out beyond the UK? Any top tips?
Yeah. So my role covers the EMEA, Europe, Middle East and Africa and Asia Pacific regions. And it's what I love about my job. It keeps me on my toes, because as you take this work around the world, boy, is it different. Every country, every culture, even 2 offices within the same country can have wildly different attitudes around mental health. So you have to localise. Yes, you can have a global overarching strategy in place, but you've got to go and talk to people in that office, in that country. We are taking mental health first aid. It is an international concept and product. It was started in Australia about 20 years ago. There are about 30 international MHFA, mental health first aid organisations out there now, in places as diverse as Saudi Arabia to Sweden to Singapore to the US. And when you have met a mental health first aider in anywhere in the world, that they will have been through exactly the same training. And that was really important for us as an organisation, to find that common language for people to be using. So yeah, we're rolling it out now across Europe this year and into Asia next year as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And really interesting, we find that talking about mental and emotional health works within the US, for example, and allowing colleagues to share their story almost from a philanthropic point of view in Asia. Well, if I tell my story, it's going to benefit other people, and it really fits that cultural context.
I would just add one really, really important piece of research that was done in the Asian context, because it is so different there. So Dyer, the Diversity and Inclusion in Asia network run by Community Business, did a brilliant piece of research this year on mental health in the workplace in Asia, covering about 8 or 9 different countries. Highly, highly recommend it if Asia is on your agenda.
Really good report. So at that, we're now on zeros, which is where we've been for most of the session, except for the last 4 minutes, 56 seconds. But I think we've done okay. I'd really like to thank the panel. I think they've shared a great deal, and I'd like to join them. Thank you very much.
I think of you as heroes rather than zeros. So thank you so much to Paulette, Marianne, Sarah and Andy for joining us. And that was a fantastic way to end today's workshop sessions, I think.